macroscopic level, they exist to kill. They travel, they attack, they hide, they even gather together in defense maneuvers. Pathogens are the enemies of every member of the healthcare team. On Pathogens and PPE, we give you the tools you need to fight these threats and win. So sit back, tune in, and let's make these microbes tremble at the sound of your name.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Pathogens and PPE podcast. This is episode number 8, Bloodborne Pathogen Exposure Prevention and Sharps Safety. Today, I have Dannie Smith and Chaz Rhone in the studio with me today. And I am Jill Holdsworth, the Manager of Infection Prevention from Emory University Hospital Midtown. Excited to be here today with these two awesome guests. And we will be right back. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back, everybody. This is the Pathogens and PPE podcast, and we are focusing all on bloodborne pathogen safety and sharps safety today. My name is Jill Holdsworth, and I am in the studio today with Dannie and Chaz. Dannie, you want to give a little bit of background about yourself as we get started?
My name is Dannie. Thank you for the introduction, Jill. And I'm an educator at Valley Hospital. I used to be an instructor at iSpy, and I've been in several different hospitals and leadership roles. I also do Surgical Tray, which is a educational and graphic design company of mine. And I just want to make it easier for people to actually engage in learning about sterile processing and have some kind of fun way to learn and grow within the field.
Thanks so much, Dannie. And Surgical Tray is actually how I met Dannie, and so excited to have him here on the show today. And I have one of my IP friends here with me, Chaz Rhone. Chaz, you want to give a little background about yourself?
Hey, Jill. Thanks for that intro. I'm Chaz. I'm the Assistant Vice President of Infection Prevention at HCA Healthcare in North Florida. So I cover pretty much the northern half of our state. Been in infection prevention now for a while, 17 years, certified fellow with APIC as well. And I love coaching IPs and helping them to develop and become leaders in addition to technical experts. And certainly what we do in infection prevention fits nicely or definitely has scope in sterile processing. So happy to be here to have the conversation today as well.
Great. Thanks. So great to have you both on this session with me today. And it's so important to talk about safety when we're talking about sterile processing and reprocessing all of these instruments. And when we're talking about bloodborne pathogen safety and sharp safety, I just want to ask you guys first, what comes to mind? What is the first thing that you would think of when you're talking to your team members about what should be at top of their mind every day? And Dannie, as an educator, this is probably something that you're talking about on a regular basis and definitely with annual training. So what comes to your mind first, and what do you tell your teammates to be thinking about all the time?
I usually just tell them to be mindful about being cut or injured, whether they think it's a serious injury or not. They need to document it and be sure that they didn't get any kind of infection from a bloodborne pathogen, because often they don't want to report something because they feel like they might get in trouble or it will take them away from their work. A lot of people are just like, I'm going to finish out the day, I'm going to do this little cut isn't much, but it could turn into something much worse, and you want to actually document it, go to the ER, get it examined to make sure that you're fine.
You know, that's such a great point that you said they may feel like they're going to get in trouble. And a theme that we have heard in several of these podcast episodes is that we really need to allow our techs to feel empowered in their work. And it doesn't matter if it's when they're feeling injured, but when they need to report any kind of safety issue, whether it's something that has happened to them or they don't have the necessary PPE, they don't have the tools that they need to do their work or to feel safe. We need to make sure that we're empowering our technicians to do the right thing and to escalate issues when they happen. So I'm glad that you said that point, because that is the reality of what happens on a daily basis. They are afraid if they don't get their work done, they're going to get in trouble, even if it compromises their own safety and health. So that's a great point. Chaz, how about you? If you were talking with your IP teams and they were going to do SPD rounds, what would be something that you tell them to look out for that would be along the lines of sharps and bloodborne pathogen safety and sterile processing?
Yeah, I would ask them to look at the environment and make sure whoever's working in that space is safe as well. So are they wearing the appropriate PPE to, separate them from any chemicals or any potentially infectious material that they would be working with? And then, ways to make them more comfortable while they're in that space. So, is there adequate ventilation that also will keep them safe? Are there anti-fatigue mats in place, because they're going to be standing for quite a while, but just making sure the environment itself is safe for them and that they're not being unnecessarily exposed to any chemicals or bloodborne pathogens.
It's such a great point that you bring up chemicals, and that's been a theme that's come up in several episodes as well, to make sure that everyone understands that chemicals are also a big deal. I think that we first consider PPE to be for bloodborne pathogens, but chemicals are a big deal in sterile processing as well. And we need to make sure that we're also ensuring safety for chemical exposure. It's not just bloodborne pathogens in sterile processing. The comfort factor is an interesting one. And as you were saying that, I just was coming to my mind that comfort is not always what you think of first when you're putting on all of that PPE in decon, right? You're hot, you're wearing a lot of extra stuff, but the more comfortable we can make our staff, the better. So even if it's something like an anti-fatigue mat or any small thing that we can do for environmental comfort can go a long way, because the PPE is a non-negotiable for safety. But Dannie, what have you seen in your work, or even that you've heard across the country, where people can make the environment a little more comfortable so that we don't see our technicians cutting corners just because they're uncomfortable in the PPE?
So making sure that they have different options for face shields. I know some people with glasses, it may fog up. So if they have a different type that might attach to the mask, and basically you want to make people comfortable in decontamination. And one of the ways to do is to make sure that the table is the correct level. So if you have tables that elevate or lower to the person's height. Also, like you said, the fatigue mats and the different gowns. So you have different options, whether it's like a really thick one, or you can have different options for your face shields. Not every place will have it, but the more options you have available to those technicians, the more they're able to customize it to their comfortability. You don't want any situation where they're kind of damaging the PPE, which I've seen, to make it like specific to them, almost like cutting into it so they can have more mobility or adding more layers. You want them to wear it the way it's supposed to per the manufacturers.
And Dannie, I have a question for you. When you talked about the tables moving up and down, I've definitely seen the prep and pack tables that do that. What about sinks that don't move up and down? You have some shorter individuals and you have some taller individuals, but the sinks are the same height no matter what. How do you correct for that, or how do you make it easier for our team members to ergonomically work at the sinks in decon if they don't move? And I'm not sure what sinks are available now. I'm sure there are nice sinks that move up and down, but not everybody is financially able to have all of the best equipment.
So what I've done personally, usually you'll at least have empty baskets in decontamination. So I'll have that, and the table was lower, so I'll place different items, other trays that I'm working on top of those trays to try and get it to a height where I'm not hunched over too much. It didn't solve the problem when reaching into the bottom of the sink, but it did help when I was actually assembling, looking through, and it made my back, it alleviated some of the stress on my back when hunched over. You just had to kind of make different options. The floor mat does help a little bit if you do have that, because it'll elevate yourself a little bit more. And I would assume that if you wanted to go lower, you might have to remove that mat so you can lower yourself. There's other options, but it's more like you gotta MacGyver it with what you have.
Yeah, great suggestions. And I do want to go back to something that you said about reporting, and I'll ask Chaz to start on this, because as IPs, we go over these types of reports as well. But when we see reports coming through, and again, really encouraging those who are listening to empower your staff members to report things when there's either near misses. Near misses are just as important as things that actually happen, because they help us learn to prevent them. And Chaz, I'll ask you to talk about that a little bit as well, but also the things that do happen that cause injury, making sure that incident reports go in, and really empowering the sterile processing technicians to put in those reports so that they are documented, the quality and risk department can follow up on them, and that IP can also help evaluate the environment to make it a safer place. Chaz, can you talk a little bit about reporting, why near misses are important, and how they're looked into, and how IP can help partner on those types of things?
Sure. So I'll say from a leadership perspective, my favorite topic to talk about, I think our job is to set an environment where it is safe to report when things happen or when things almost happen. And so from an IP perspective, I always encourage the IPs when they're going into these spaces to understand what's going on, to be curious and not judgmental. So ask a lot of questions and really seek to understand why there may be noncompliance or why the space is unsafe. Because if we can't get those clear answers or expose those barriers from the people who are doing the work every day, it's going to be much harder to be able to help them. So we just need to create the narrative that we are present to help and make their work environment more safe and better for them. Near misses are very important because they can turn into an event if they're not addressed. So, as infection preventionists, part of our role is to prevent things from happening. And one way to do that is to identify risk and help mitigate that risk before it becomes an injury or an unsafe event to a worker or a patient. And so near misses allow us to be a little bit more proactive in how we might address some of these things that otherwise wouldn't have come up unless somebody was injured or something bad happened. And so, yes, near misses are just as important as the actual events themselves.
And something I just thought of that I've meant to do in the past and I haven't done is to lay out some examples of things that would be good topics for sterile processing and the OR to put into the incident reporting system, because these areas may not be areas that are used to putting in things as much as some of the rest of us are. So it might be something good for education. And Danny, you might have already done this or thought of this, so I'd be curious to see how you educate to things like this. But giving them some tools to say, hey, if you have these things happen, this would be something to put into the safe reporting system. So kind of giving them that guide and having their leadership support that and educate to that so they all know we're all on the same page. Danny, what are your thoughts on that? And how do you educate to reporting incidences now?
So with the educational for reporting the incidences, I make sure to actually have an in-service with the staff so that even if I inform the leadership, the staff will know how the process is supposed to go. So if there's any kind of deviation, they can work with each other to actually go through it. And then, like Chaz has said, you want to make it an environment where it's comfortable for them to actually approach leadership, report those issues that have gone on, or any kind of accident that may have happened. So you want to know if somebody does fall in decontam or something happens, if there's a witness, what situation you can do. So what information you're going to need to report to that leadership before they're taken away to the ER to be examined.
And coming from someone in quality, I will say we want to make it a just culture, a really comfortable environment to where they also feel comfortable putting their name as to who reports it. Because we do see sometimes in quality where people won't put their name. They don't want to say who reported it, but they want to report the safety issue they're seeing in their department, or they want to say what's going on, but they definitely don't want anyone to know it was them. They don't want somebody to follow back up with them because they're, again, afraid they're going to get in trouble if somebody knows that they reported something. But it is so valuable for someone to be able to come back to that person and say, can I ask you a couple follow-up questions? Can we review what you put down? So it is very helpful to create that environment and create that culture where it's okay to report these safety issues. So I really encourage all of you listening to make sure that that's the culture that you're promoting and creating, and really reviewing to make sure that is what's happening in your area. Okay, I'm going to move on to another topic that I see this on social media all the time. I love this topic. We talk about this here as well. So I hope this also starts some conversation once this episode airs. But Dannie, I'm going to start with you. And this is the topic on BIs and how we should be disposing of BIs. Do these go in a sharps container, or do they go in the regular trash after they ran? What are your thoughts?
So I was actually looking this up because I didn't want to actually just throw them into the sharps container, but I knew they wouldn't go into the trash. So you're like, okay, so sharps container. It also has biohazardous material in there, and it's sealed, it's puncture proof. So it seems like the most safe and logical option, and it's what we do at our facility. Also, when looking at the BIs, there are no health effects for like inhalation, skin contact, eye contact, and ingestion, even though you shouldn't be ingesting it, which I had a vendor say was perfectly fine too. But that's something I would never bring up in my in-service. Yes, he told us, everybody stared at him like, yeah, we can leave that detail out. But I don't have a problem with throwing them into the sharps container. We usually just put the extra ones in a pill pack. I know years ago, we would have somebody who would cook them first, kind of kill the spore and everything, and then throw them away. But if one of you would actually help me out on like if that was a necessary step, or if we could just throw them into the sharps container itself, I'd appreciate it.
Thanks. Chaz, what are your thoughts?
Wow. So this is actually something that I had never thought about. And so this is kind of, I've had this conversation a lot. I don't work in the space every day. So this is something that it has never even crossed my mind. But if I had to think about it or give a suggestion, if I was put on the spot.
Like right now?
I would probably, yes. I would either steer towards biohazardous waste or sharps because of that biohazard piece that's attached to it. And so I would kind of think along the same pathway as how do we dispose of things in the laboratory setting? And it's typically going to be one of those two pathways, and definitely not the regular trash. I can be pretty confident about that piece. So
yeah, this is such an interesting topic because there isn't anything out there that I know of that says anything definite about where it needs to be disposed of. I would love to see it, but from what I have seen, and the reason this came up recently, we were talking about it because, interestingly, I used to always see sharps containers in our clean areas, and honestly, I never really thought about what was going in it. I always was more concerned that they were secured. During environmental rounds, I always wanted to make sure that they had the little dish, we call them, that the sharps containers sit in so that they're secured. So during environmental rounds, we could say, yes, they are compliant, they're secured. Never really paid attention to what was going inside of it. And then I saw on social media that people were talking about this, and no one seems to agree, which is so interesting to me. But what's inside the BI after you use it is inactivated. So in my opinion, it shouldn't really need to be in the biohazard trash after the cycle. And does it really need to go into the sharps container afterwards? I'm not sure, and the reason we're talking about it here is just because of the cost associated with red bag waste and the sharps waste and all of that. So what is the answer? I'm not sure. I wanted to bring it up here just for the dialogue, and I love it because, again, nobody is actually sure what you're supposed to do with these, and it is not in any standard. So for those of you listening, I'm putting it out there in the universe that we need to get it in a standard. We need to know exactly what to do with it because I believe we are being wasteful with what we're doing, and we need to make sure that we are doing the right thing, but also doing what is best for the environment, best for the bottom line of the hospitals. So that is what I'm putting out there. Danny, what you got?
I just had a question. So I do agree with once it's actually sterilized, the ampule being inactivated. But with our controls, like you have leftover controls in that little bag, would you advise maybe sterilizing that or throwing that in the sharps container?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. So the leftover controls are kind of like the gray area, I guess. And that's what you were saying. People were sterilizing those in a peel pack, right? Yeah. So I guess you definitely couldn't throw those in the regular trash. Those would have to go into a biohazard or a sharps container.
Okay. Yeah, so that's what I'm used to doing, but I wasn't sure if that was overkill method or not, but I was like, better safe than sorry.
I also wonder, IFUs are very popular in our body of work as well. So I'm wondering if there's anything in the IFUs in regards to how to dispose of these. So I've never looked, but I would be curious to take a look and kind of see what's out there.
Yeah, this is such a cool topic, and that's why I couldn't wait to bring it up here because this is all about sharp safety too, in a little bit of a twisted way. A little bit different of a topic on sharp safety. I really want to get your all's thoughts on how we can partner better as SPD experts and IPs with our procedural areas, because we know that they don't always send the trays back in such a way that is necessarily safe for our technicians to not get sharps injuries. So how can we partner better with them and make sure that they're sending the trays back in a way that are organized and is in the most safest way? And this is outside of pre-cleaning and spraying and all of that. But what are your thoughts, Danny? Have you ever worked with the procedural areas on how to organize their trays when they come back to decon?
Yes, I think the easiest way to have the OR assist you with getting the trays back in a fashion that one won't harm our technicians is letting them know the risks. They already know about that, but letting them know how sending the instruments back in a proper way can extend the life of those instruments, especially those delicate instruments. So if they're put together properly, you'll have less chance of any kind of damage to it. You'll have less chance of basically people getting injured, and then also your turnover rate will be higher. So inform the OR, let them know, and then do documentation. Just like how if we send something up there, they'll report it that we're missing an instrument, it wasn't identified. We'll also call the OR, let the leadership know that certain things came back. There was a sharp inside, item was sticking through the basket, the forceps is no longer usable, has to be sent out. So just open communication both ways, and never really a blame game, just like informative, because we're all trying to get those instruments done properly in a good, fashionable time.
I think that immediate feedback to the OR is so important, and I think it doesn't happen quite as often as it should. And any kind of like time zero real-time education that you can do back to the OR is going to be invaluable to that team. Because if you wait till the end of the month and you say like, oh, this month we had 50 trays that had this going on with it, everybody's going to think this isn't my issue. I didn't do it. But if you can immediately go back to that team and say, this came back, they're going to know this was me, this was my room. So I think that is the absolute best way that you can do it. If you can really hardwire that process, that will really get you the best results. We are just about at time. Chaz, do you have any closing comments you want to add to that, or just to how to keep people safe from exposures in sterile processing as we wrap up?
Yeah, I agree that immediate feedback loop is important. I also think as IPs, we're used to following a process like kind of through completion to see where there may be any gaps or anything like that. So I think starting the auditing process in the OR, and also while you're auditing a process, giving that real-time coaching or education moment and helping them understand the why. So although this may not impact you, this tray is going to someone else that then has to remove these instruments, reprocess them. Or if there's time, you can take them with you as part of the process so they can see what's going to happen next. And I think that's a really big eye opener for some people when they understand that it's not just about me and what I'm trying to do, but how do I help to protect my coworker that's going to have to deal with this on the other end.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, guys, I thank you so much for being on this episode today. This has been a really great discussion. There's probably so much more we can talk about with just keeping people safe in sterile processing and how to report. But this is just scratching the surface. But we are unfortunately out of time. Thank you all for being on the show, and we will see everybody on the next episode. Thanks so much. On today's episode, we heard so many great things. This was an awesome conversation. We talked a lot about reporting and how important it was to empower our technicians to make sure they were reporting near misses just as much as actual safety events, how important it was to partner with the ORs and procedural areas to ensure the trays they were sending are safe and organized correctly so that our technicians are safe when they're unpacking those instruments. We talked about BIs and how they should be disposed of. We also talked about some of the biggest risk factors for exposures and sharps injuries. We talked about the environment, which I thought was really cool, about keeping our team members as comfortable as possible, because the PPE isn't always going to be as comfortable as we want it to be. So let's talk about the other environmental factors that we can impact so that they are as comfortable as we can make them, and they don't make shortcuts for that PPE that's going to keep them as safe as possible. That's all for today, and we will see you next time on episode number 9. Don't forget to wash your hands and keep fighting dirty.
Thanks for tuning in to this exclusive podcast series on pathogens and PPE. For more information and clinical resources to help you fight dirty, make sure to follow us on social media by searching for Beyond Clean and Transmission Control.